Welcome to Season 4 of the NAC 4 Business Podcast.
Quick word from today's sponsor. You know that moment when something complicated finally clicks? That's what Fred Crouch does with real estate. His podcast, Property Wizard, from Gentry Learning, makes property wealth feel less like a mystery and more like a plan. Links in the show notes.
Question to the audience. Now that you understand the basics, how do you take your real estate investing from beginner luck to a repeatable, profitable system? In this episode, our returning guest builds on our earlier conversations and goes deeper into real estate topics listeners asked for. How to compare deals beyond the sales pitch, smarter financing in today's interest world, ownership structures that protect your family and taxes, balancing active versus passive strategies, recognizing when a property is a gem or a trap. Drawing from Gentry Learning and the Property Wizard methods, Fred will show how experienced investors think before they sign anything. Which leads me to who our guest is, Fred Crouch from Gentry Learning and the Property Wizard. He's also has a newsletter out there called PropertyWise. He's the broker of record, managing director of Gentry Real Estate Services, and the voice behind the Property Wizard podcast. With over 35 years of trust experience, Fred helps investors and institutions navigate the world of commercial real estate with clarity, confidence, and integrity. He's a certified expert with credentials like FRI, ACOM, CPM, CLO, and more, and has handled everything from distressed properties to government asset recovery. Through Gentry Learning and his popular podcast, Fred demystifies complex investment topics like turning leaseholds into freeholds so everyday investors can make smarter decisions. Off the clock, he's a tireless community contributor, having donated blood nearly over 100 times, and served on multiple nonprofit boards. If you're looking to invest wisely, manage risk, or simply understand your real estate options better, Fred's insights are your next smart move. Fred, welcome.
Thank you. That's quite an introduction. Thank you so much. You almost made me sound certifiable. I know
we're not worthy. We're not worthy.
But thank you for the introduction. For the record, I'm now up to 104 donations of blood. Very proud of that. I think all your listeners should get out there and become advocates for the Red Cross, number one. And just this past week, we celebrated our 39th year, just on the parapet of 40 years. So it's been a long time, but thank you. What a wonderful introduction. I'm very happy to be a return guest. This is my 5th NAC for Business episode, and I thank you very much for having me on.
You know, a source of wisdom is always appreciated, and I know today we're going to be talking about leverage, being the real power in real estate. What is leverage? Just, as a quick outliner for anybody who's new to these sessions.
Well, leverage is really what differentiates a real estate investment from any other type of investment. Leverage allows you to take advantage of market trends and the increase in value of a piece of real estate without having to contribute the entirety of that purchase or the value of the asset. It may sound a little convoluted, but let's just put it in very, very simple terms. If you were to take $100,000 and invest it, let's say in a GIC or mutual fund, and let's say you got 4% annually, that would equate to about $4,000 in appreciation. Now that's $100,000. Now, if you had $100,000 invested in real estate, and let's, for argument's sake, say you're buying a $400,000 property and you're putting down 25%. So what ends up happening is that, and let's use the same rate of return, let's use 4%. Leverage means that you get that 4% return, not just on the $100,000 that you would if you, again, placed it in a GIC or some sort of term deposit, but you get that 4% on the entirety, or that $400,000 investment, or the value of the piece of real estate that you've purchased. So what you're talking about, just based on pure simple figures, is that you get a return of $16,000 in this particular case versus $4,000. Does that make sense? Am I making myself clear? Is it as clear as mud?
Well, you're doing well. In other words, although you've got money invested in something, its value grows over time. It's like if you bought gold in 1920 and you still held on to the same gold. If you bought it in 1920 and you're still alive, I guess it has more dollar value today, except you don't have to wait that long with real estate.
For a more defined definition, I'd have to take a page out of part one of my investment ebook. And in it, I describe leverage as the following. I'm going to read it. Leverage allows you to borrow against the value of an asset while retaining the benefit of appreciation over the asset in its entirety. Again, let me read that again. Leverage allows you to borrow against the value of an asset while retaining the benefit of appreciation over the asset in its entirety. So it goes back to you're borrowing, in effect, using the same $400,000 property, you're borrowing the other $300,000. You're only putting down $100,000, but you're borrowing $300,000. That is, in fact, leverage. You're using your 100 to buy 300, essentially. Further, the income from your tenancies pays for your debt, which, I mean, what other kind of investment does that? And what I'm speaking about is primarily your mortgage. So let's say you buy an income property, you have tenants, maybe a tenant. The money that they pay you every month to live in the premises, whether you're renting a room in your home or whether it's a triplex, fourplex, whatever it might be, that money goes towards paying down the principal of your mortgage. And we know how that works. I mean, if you borrow $300,000 on day one, if you go down the road and let's say, for instance, 10 years later, the balance of your mortgage is no longer $300,000. It might be $225,000. So where does that differential come from? That's come from the income that your tenants have paid you to live in the premises. So it creates equity through the pay down of your mortgage, or in this case, your financing. So there just isn't another type of investment, Bernie, that allows you to do that. In the simplest form, you take your money and you put it in a savings account. And today, if you get 0.5 of a percentage point, let's say some hybrids offer you 1.5, 2 points, that's what you're going to get. So on that $100,000 again, if you're getting 2 points, that means that you're getting $2,000 in interest annually. But if you use that same $100,000 and bought a property, it doesn't have to be $400,000. It could be 200, 300, in some circumstances, it could even be a little more. You're really kind of limited by how much money the property produces income-wise and what that will carry in debt service. And again, I know I'm touching on a whole bunch of different things, but the important factor, the point that I'm trying to get across is that leverage is what makes real estate work as well as it does. Leverage is unique to real estate. So that again, because you're using the asset to secure additional financing and you're not putting down the whole value of the asset, you're only putting down a portion of the value of the asset. Yet, when market trends are upwards, you benefit by the appreciation of the asset as a whole, not just the 100,000 you put down. In the example I gave you, and that's not really an outlandish situation or scenario, really. You buy a $400,000 property, you put 25% down, you get a new first mortgage. If that property goes up by 4%, 5, 10%, that 4, 5, 10% increase is reflected in the total value of the property. So if it's a $400,000 again, a 4%, it means it's worth $416,000. At 10, it's $440,000. That increase, the value increases, and that is equity. And equity is really, it adds to the bottom line. Make sense?
So absolutely. So a couple of quick questions here. You mentioned an ebook. So if I was looking to go, I want to read about this and digest it and, understand it more, how do I find that ebook?
You visit our page, Gentry Learning page. It's there at a very, very nominal cost. I think it's $8.88. It's something really ridiculous. We just thought we had so many queries and questions that are somewhat rudimentary. And that's why, for instance, even again, our newsletter this month really, I wanted to go back because it's the beginning of the year and a lot of my listeners and the recipients of the newsletter are always, most everybody, it's a new year and people say, you know what, this year, I'm going to buy that property I've always wanted to buy. Or this year, maybe I'm going to buy a second property. It's not unusual. The beginning of the year, people make plans. So I thought it was the timing was right to reintroduce and talk about the things that make real estate unique and the reasons why real estate is such a good investment. And you hit on it right off the bat, Bernie. It's leverage, unique to real estate.
So my next question is, you see a lot of large international corporate firms buying up housing, and you almost think it's like an extreme big boy game. And I think that's kind of a fallacy. There are opportunities that are available in our markets, local markets, are there not?
Absolutely. What you're referencing and what you're talking about is the current trend, particularly down in the States, although it is happening up here in Canada. And as a matter of fact, I'd suggest to you that it's happening all over the world. In some instances, and you and I have touched base on this before, most residential, like apartments or homes, are owned by the state or owned by a few big players. And we can get into that discussion some other day. But what's happening is that as housing prices have increased, fewer and fewer families, individuals can actually afford to purchase their own home. But what they can do is that they can rent a property. And this is purely because of interest rates. That's what it is. It's purely because of interest rates. At the end of the day, when interest rates are low, a lot of people can afford to buy a home. When they're a little higher, they kind of creep outside the GDS and TDS ratios that banks, base their approvals on. Just for your listeners, TDS is a total debt service ratio. GDS is a gross debt service ratio. A gross debt service ratio deals primarily with the home, with the residence. So using that calculation, what they do is they add up the mortgage payment, the property taxes. If it's a condominium, they'll add those too, and they'll calculate that on an annual basis. And that amount needs to be at a set ratio or percentage of your gross income. Usually it's somewhere between, depending on where you're at, 29 to 34% of your gross annual income can be used for the purchase and essentially the taxes, again, the mortgage, and in the case, again, of a condominium, your condominium fees. TDS, total debt service ratio, is all that plus any outstanding loans that you might have, like a car loan, for instance, a consumer loan, maybe some sort of credit card debt. So that ratio is higher, where TDS might be between 29 and 35%. A GDS may be 40, 45, 46%. So they do give you more room. But what happens is when interest rates go up, your GDS goes up and it falls outside the guidelines that are predetermined by the bank. So with fewer and fewer people entering into and let's be brutally honest, especially in this country, we can't possibly make enough homes to take care of this perceived housing crisis. There's no way we can do it. No way. I mean, you hear governments constantly saying, well, we're going to commit to building, 400, 500,000 homes this year. They all recognize that are monumental shortfalls when it comes to housing. So what happens is when you've got people in the market that can't find a home, let alone afford it, it puts increased pressure on the rental market. So to go back to your original question, what's happening with these large corporations buying up these huge, not just blocks of residential housing, entire subdivisions of housing are being sold to huge U.S. interests because they recognize that the pressure and the real demand, and when it comes to affordability, is in rentals. So remember, this entire program and discussion, what we're having right now, has to do with you going out there and buying an income property. Now look, at the big boys are doing it right now. They're buying up hundreds, thousands of homes, and they are turning around and managing those and renting them out because they see that as a long-term, stable investment tool. What we're talking about is whether it's Bernie and your better half, or Joe Investor, or somebody who may be listening from any other part of the world, what we're suggesting is that you take a page out of that book. Although I'm going to suggest to you that there were more mom and pop investors out there than there were ever large corporations investing in tracts and entire subdivisions. So the tables have kind of turned, because you used to see these large investment companies that are extremely well funded. They have hundreds of millions, billions of dollars available at their discretion, they used to buy things like office towers, retail plazas. And what's happened with those, Bernie? We know what's happened. I mean, with the downturn after COVID, I mean, a lot of these sectors just haven't regained the ground that they lost. And a classic example is like office space, office buildings. Boy, oh boy, if you had an office building 20 years ago, that was quite an accomplishment. Today, I mean, it's a huge liability, which takes us to another point about diversifying your portfolio. So that's what the big boys are doing. They see what's happening. What we're suggesting is that you take a page or reread a page of a book that was originally written by mom and pop operators. That's one of the reasons why. Look at it. If they're doing it, there's no reason why you'd be wrong, or I'd be wrong in suggesting that you can do the same thing, the exact same thing.
Oh, this begs a question. Though. I get the diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, because if one market goes soft, you have the other one to help support and sustain you. And as we're talking right now, we've talked about residential rentals. But, you mentioned office towers and plazas. So does the use of leverage, when does leverage go wrong? When does it become dangerous? Is it when you've isolated it too much in one area and that area goes soft in that particular market? Because it may not be universal. Like what's happening on Vancouver is not happening in Newfoundland or in St. John's, right?
Yeah. So what you're talking about are the incredible increases in the costs of a residential housing unit, whether it's a condominium apartment, whether it's a single family home. Again, it's supply and demand again. Remember, we were speaking earlier about how there's this pent-up demand for housing. And when there's a pent-up demand and there isn't enough of a product, what happens? The product goes up. It's not rocket science, supply and demand. So when does leverage go wrong? Well, maybe you pay a little too much for the property to begin with. I really caution against jumping on board a trend because everybody else is jumping on board. We've always been more about trying to find the right opportunity. Look, anybody can go out and buy brand spanking new condominium. But I have to tell you, not too many people I know have made money or had considerable returns by buying a new condominium. You may make money if you buy a pre-sale where a builder is advertising a development, an apartment condominium, for instance, which is you're looking out 2-3 years down the road before it's actually built. I've heard and I've seen people make money that way, but it's awfully risky. It's risky for a number of reasons, and I'll draw your attention directly to Toronto, even Vancouver. Both markets have been suffering the same way. You have all these pre-approved condominium towers going up in both markets, but what's happened is that they were pre-sold, so that the prices that they were pre-sold at, because of the increase in the costs associated with constructing these units, isn't enough to cover the nut at the end of the day. So what you're seeing are a lot of builders closing their doors. You're saying, no, we're not going ahead with this. We're not doing it. Now, most builders will not have spent the money that a consumer may have put down on the property. That money is and should be held in trust in all circumstances, but that's not always the case. So there are circumstances and situations where, yes, you can, if you overpay for a property, things can go sideways for you, but we're talking about pre-construction. In other instances, you can take any property and overpay for it. And the harsh reality is that it can go sideways if you don't put enough money down on it. You maybe haven't done your due diligence. Maybe you're taking a property to turn it around. Maybe it lacks tenants. By not doing your due diligence, maybe you don't know any of any material defects that are going to have to be remedied. If you don't have the talent and ability to rectify a situation, and remember, we've talked, on a number of occasions about the type of property you should be looking for when it comes to investing. Yes, you can turn around and invest in a Class A strip plaza. Brilliant. But unless you've got a considerable amount of money down and some good solid leases, that too can be maybe a risky proposition. Look, I love strip plazas, but I would suggest to you that they're a better investment maybe for a group, for a syndication or co-tenancy group. You know how I feel about co-tenancy groups. I mean, I just think they're the best way to buy real estate, period. So yes, it is possible, and sometimes through no fault of your own. Look at, if you enter into a 5-year mortgage, let's say your first mortgage is a 5-year mortgage, and you were fortunate enough to sign up for 3.5%, so the interest rate has been pretty steady and the payments have been steady and you're managing well. And all of a sudden the interest rate skyrockets to 6.5%, almost 7%. Yeah, you may have a little bit of difficulty. As a matter of fact, the lender on renewal may turn around and say, to put things back in balance, we need a principal payment of, $30, $40, $50, $100,000. Now that doesn't happen very often. But I want to, in a case, or I want to fully disclose. I mean, you asked me a very pointed question. Are there instances? I would be wrong in dismissing that question. I would be wrong in suggesting to you that there isn't. But what you need to keep in mind is that you generally make your money and you can secure the financial success of your investment when you buy it. In other words, you make your money in real estate when you buy it. Buying it right and having a plan for the property, including proper management, is how you're going to make money with that investment. Now, again, and I touched on it just briefly before, we're always looking for property where there's what we call forced appreciation. Now, forced appreciation is something that you do to remedy the performance of the property. There's natural appreciation, where you'll see a 2, 3, 4% increase per year on the value of the property and you do nothing. And in some markets, that's even skyrocketed to as high as 10, 15%. And then there's forced appreciation. And a forced appreciation is basically making a silk purse from a sow's ear. You bought a property with recognizing the fact that there was an opportunity here. There was an opportunity to improve that property, to maximize the utility of that property, to maximize the return vis-a-vis the income of that property to get a better return. Those are the type of properties I'm a big fan of. Those are the type of properties that I'm constantly on the lookout for. What that allows you to do is increase your margin of appreciation. So that's why we call it forced appreciation. It's something that doesn't happen naturally. It happens because you've done something to improve it, whether that's income-wise, whether that's maybe improving a building or a property that's functionally obsolete. Maybe the use is obsolete. I mean, let's say you buy a mall and there's a Blockbuster Video that hasn't been in operation for 15 years in there. I mean, now you go in being the genius that you are, and maybe you want to, I don't know, what's the big trend today? I mean,
Vape store?
Maybe.
Or cannabis?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, maybe you put a cannabis dispensary into it. Maybe you put a hookah bar in it, not a hookah. So just to clarify that, we don't want to have your podcast X-rated.
So there might be some limitations what you could do in that space. Just kind of a quick question here. So assuming whatever the asset is, whether it's a commercial, a leasehold space, whether it's office, strip mall, or residential, if let's say it's worth $100, I'm rounding or 100,000 or $500,000, right? What, proper number. When do you think the leverage, is there a certain point where I can do it now and leverage that property? Is it like, say, on a 5-year mortgage, did you do it year 2, and then listen, I want to leverage that property to gain more funds for another property or to grow it? Is there a magic kind of a rule of thumb? And I know there are a lot of variables, everything from market conditions to restrictions in the community, if you're going to change the use of the property and so forth. But is there kind of rule of thumb that you would work from?
Yeah. So good question. Thank you for that. There isn't necessarily a rule of thumb, but that's what you're talking about is another form of leverage. You're talking about leveraging the existing property to buy another property, which is traditionally the way real estate wealth is created. I mean, so many people convolute the history and the story behind it, but then thank you very much for your question. It really completely depends on market conditions. You're in a much better situation to be able to do exactly what it is you just described if you've entered into the ownership of a property where you've had to do something vis-a-vis forced appreciation, where you've increased the value of that property exponentially or greater than what natural appreciation has. That's the way that works. So you take a rundown property. I've seen this happen several times. You take a rooming house. You take a house that, look, I was just in a house earlier this morning, completely run down. An absolute unmitigated disaster. You would never have believed that the inside of that property was what it was, considering the neighborhood it was in. So eventually what will end up happening, a buyer will buy it. They'll turn around, do the work to improve it. And the individual that I showed this property to will more than likely pay with other funds to improve this property. And by the time they're done, they will have taken a property that they're asking right now $600,000. I just ran a comparable list after coming back and viewing it, and the properties are worth $1 million, $1.1 million. It's probably going to take him $250,000 to improve it. But if he buys it right, then what will end up happening, he'll make, a relatively large chunk of money. He'll make $350,000. So what he can do, he doesn't have to sell that property, but what he can do is he can refinance the property. So in that particular case, maybe he might want to rent it out, and it's a big home. It's a 4+1 bedroom home in a suburban type setting, very desirable area, schools, everything around. So what he'll be able to do is refinance the property and pull some of that money out. And that way he can use that money for the purchase of something else. But there isn't a standard rule of thumb. There isn't. I've seen situations where there's been such a dramatic increase in the value of the property that people have been able to leverage it, renew or get a new first mortgage or maybe even a second mortgage and buy another property in a very short period of time. I'm talking about 6 months, 10 months, less than a year. But generally speaking, what ends up happening is that you'll have to hold on to that property, being very conservative. You're going to have to hold on to that property for 4 or 5 years before, if you don't do anything to it, and if it's solely based on natural appreciation and there aren't any special circumstances that would make the value of the property skyrocket, you're going to have to wait 4 or 5 years before you leverage that property with the idea of buying another based on the increased amount of equity that you have in it. Now, that's you as a soul. One of the reasons why I like co-tenancy so much is because you can rapidly diversify your investment portfolio. And you do that by, again, let's keep working around this $100,000. Let's say you have $100,000, but that's what you have. You have $100,000 and you have enough money to close. So that $100,000, if you spend it on one property, okay, fair enough. You're going to have to wait. You're going to have to do, what improvements you seem or deem necessary, if that's the type of property it is. Or that $100,000 will buy you maybe a property where you don't really have to do too much. And that's okay. That's all right. Okay. Because there's different types of investors. I mean, you may just want to invest with the idea of holding on and having another piece of property. Brilliant. I think everybody should do that. And those that don't usually aren't of the age where they're fast approaching retirement, because I know a lot of people in the back of their mind saying, I should have, I could have. I don't know why I didn't. Well, you didn't because you weren't sure about the next steps. But and that's not buying anything that requires a great deal of work. It's buying a very simple, maybe another single family home, maybe a condominium apartment. That's brilliant. That's great. But when you're buying property through a co-tenancy, you usually have, there are 2, 3, 4. I've done co-tenancies with 15 individuals. A co-tenancy, if you were to invest or to buy into a co-tenancy, that same property, that $400,000 property, your $100,000, maybe you become let's say you have 3 other partners. You still need $100,000 down, but what you do is each one of you contributes $25,000 instead of you contributing $100,000. What does that do for you? That allows you to enter into another co-tenancy where maybe you need $25,000 or you need $50,000. And immediately the wisdom in that is that you're diversifying. So where you may have bought a condo, like an apartment condo, maybe you buy a townhouse or maybe you buy a single family home. Those are all different markets outside of being residential. Those are all different markets. They fluctuate, increase and decrease in value differently. Just because condominiums may have gone up 10% doesn't necessarily mean that a single family home in the same area will go up 10%. Chances are maybe it went up 5%. So we're touching on an awful lot of things, but I really think if your goal is to expand your portfolio, I think the only way you can do that effectively, in my way of looking at it, is to get involved with a co-tenancy, because you could take that same $100,000 and maybe invest it in 2 or 3 different types of real estate. And one thing that's so very, very important, let's say you buy a strip plaza, and let's say you need a new roof or even a roof repair. What's easier for you to handle? Is it easier for you to handle a $40,000 repair all on your own? Or if you have 3 other partners, is it easier for you to handle a $10,000 repair all on your own? I think it's pretty self-obvious. So yes, you give up 100% ownership. You still have ownership, but it also allows you to diversify into a number of different type of real estate, forms of real estate.
So a leverage question here. If you're in a co-tenancy, whether it's just a partner or 10 other people, and you want to leverage your part of the stake, can you leverage it separately, or does that have to be done as a group?
Yeah, no, you'd have to do it as part of a group. But a co-tenancy, a good co-tenancy document will allow any party who's a member of that co-tenancy to sell their share separate and apart from the other shares. Usually the way it works is that, let's say, and people come across there are all sorts of reasons why you might want to divest, and none having to do with the performance of the property, but personal reasons. Let's say one of your partners is going bankrupt, or one of your partners is maybe going through a divorce. So in situations like that, and we don't wish that on anybody, but in circumstances like that, you may have to divest yourself. So that means you can take your share of the property, not the total share, the equitable share. So what you would do in a circumstance like that, you usually get at least 2 appraisals done. And that's very, very easy. You just divide it by the number of stakeholders. That represents what your share is worth. Now, you then are free to offer that to someone else who may love the property, would like to get involved in that type of real estate scenario. I have had it once or twice. It's not very common, but it does happen. Now, there is sometimes a single caveat, and that caveat is you have to offer it to your partners first, and that only makes sense.
This sounds so much like a shareholder agreement.
Well, essentially it is. It's just a little different. What we deal with a co-tenancy is a percentage share ownership. That's what we do. So what you usually do is you break down, let's say, Bernie, you have $100,000 to invest, Wayne's got 50. I'm, at the end of I have 25. We had a smattering of other people that have 25, maybe another one at 50. What a co-tenancy allows you to do, it allows you to separate ownership of the property. I'm not talking about physically separating it. I'm just talking about an interest. You're able to separate an interest in the property. So we're talking about a co-tenancy. You can't really not talk about a joint tenancy. In a joint tenancy, which is what most couples have once they buy a single family home, their relationship is called a joint tenancy. Whether it's defined or not, it doesn't matter. It's a joint tenancy. And the big difference between a joint tenancy and tenants in common is something called right of survivalship. So what happens is that under the let's say one of the parties passes away. What happens in a joint tenancy, their interest in that property immediately diverts to the surviving spouse or party. Immediately. That's not the situation in a co-tenancy. A co-tenancy, your share interest in the property reverts back to your estate. That's what it does. So your estate can do with it whatever it is they want to do with it. And vis-a-vis, you're also allowed as a consequence to turn around and sell your interest to another party. Again, with the caveat that it should be offered to your partners first. Does that make any sense? Does that?
Yeah. No. Having gone through a shareholder agreement process, there's a whole bunch of elements like everybody has to concur, voting rights. Do you still act as a can you each put in your opinion, or you're just silent? If you may have bought it, I totally get all of that. This kind of circles me back to the next piece of the puzzle. You might have the gist of how things flow, and so you know how to work with leverage. But I think the key piece is having someone like yourself, commercial realtor, an accountant, and a lawyer. Those are going to be kind of at least 3 base elements you should have in place, if not more, depending on what you're about to get into involved with, because the realtor will know what's happening in the market. What's happening is that puppy in the window worth that dollar value, right? And is it appreciating? Versus, you might say in the Toronto market or in the Vancouver market, but they have what they call a bubble, so hyperinflated. And as we now know in Toronto, that condos aren't worth as much as they were once worth at one point in time.
Come back, mind you, because that goes back to, something, I reference and is spoken of as being the cyclical theory of real estate. Real estate constantly, in very few markets does it react differently, but real estate constantly goes up and down, up and down. Different markets have different wavelengths. Different markets, will react faster to an economic situation versus a larger one. For instance, if you have a small town and there's a single employer and they decide they're going to shut down the mill, property values are going to plummet. They're going to plummet because there's not that demand and there aren't those or good paying jobs to support the purchase of real estate. So in that particular case, there are scenarios where that natural instinct or that natural sine wave is disrupted, through market conditions and situations that are beyond anybody's control, very much like interest rates, very much like the cost of goods. So there are some items that you just can't control. So it's always good, again, I feel, to check and recheck your figures. Getting into speculative real estate it's not something I'm a real strong advocate of. Yes, you can make money, but you need to be prepared. You need to understand the pitfalls. I like rock solid real estate. I like real estate that you can go up to and touch the building. I'm not a big advocate of investing in real estate related mortgages, particularly if you want to do that yourself for your own portfolio, that's one thing, but when you hear these people saying, geez, Joe down the street is getting a 15% return in 3 months for investing in this real estate project. And when you look at it a little further, it has to do with lending money to the construction company, and the construction company is offering to pay you 15% on your money in 3 months or 6 months. That sounds a little too good to be true. And when these situations or scenarios backfire and go belly up, you feel, well, I'm secure. I mean, they told me that I have a mortgage on the property. Well, yeah, absolutely you have a mortgage. But what they didn't tell you, it's behind a first, second, third, and fourth mortgage. Now, just for clarification for your listeners, the only thing that dictates whether a mortgage is a first, second, third, fourth is the sequence or the timing as to when the lien or the mortgage was registered. So a first mortgage is simply a mortgage that was registered first. A second is subsequent. Now, there are other things we could get into, dealing with the right of redemption and, title and those things. But just from an investment standpoint, you need to be very, very careful when somebody comes to you and says, look, I can get this kind of return in this period of time. And this is the real estate project, and you think, oh, great. It's secured by a block of property, in downtown, I don't know, Dallas. And you think, wow, what could go wrong? Well, what could go wrong is maybe the company that you're lending the money to ends up insolvent. And you may think you've got a good, secure investment, but then you realize again that, yeah, you have a mortgage on the property, but it sits in third, fourth, fifth position. And there's more money owing in front of you because inevitably what's going to end up happening, that property will be sold or refinanced. Now, they're not going to get enough money to turn around and repay everybody. So at the end of the day, the further down the line you are, the less are the chances that you are going to get any type of return, let alone your principal back. So you need to be careful about those things. Boy, we've really gone all over the place, haven't we, Bertie?
Yeah. So Fred, just on our home stretch here, you have your ebooks, you have a podcast, and you have a course.
Yes.
So let's quickly touch on those elements and how people can find them.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing those up. burning. At the end of the day, you can simply visit gentrylearning.com or go to gentryrealestateservices.com. There you'll find a whole host. If you follow the drop-down menus, you'll find a whole variety. I think all the podcasts are available there. We were just setting up and making the ebook on investing available to our listeners, and it's there. Very, very nominal cost. It just essentially pays for producing and putting things together. And you can also get copies of our past Property Wise newsletters. Like I said, all the podcasts are there. The courses are there. It's really it's really a well-rounded portfolio, and it's there for the listening public. It's there in most circumstances or situations. There isn't any cost at all. The podcasts are there for you. Course materials are available at a very, very ridiculously nominal cost. And we're going to have newsletters up in short order where you can actually go back. And if there's a newsletter or topic you'd like to either read or download, it'll be available to you.
What's the name of the newsletter?
Property Wise.
Perfect. Yeah. Fred, I want to say thank you so much for being a return guest. It's awesome having you here. Some of the stuff we've talked about both in the Property Wizard podcast and in previous Knack for Business podcasts. And every once in a while, it's like, we have another kernel of truth that comes out. And just for you guys that are listening in, there are certain things, doesn't matter which part of the world you're in, there are certain golden truths. Like physics, if it's hot, right? And if it's cold, it's cold. And so the math doesn't lie. The rules of engagement might shift based on where you live. There might be certain rules on finance and law and so forth. But the course holds a lot of truth because it's the principles, how money moves and how money works and how to figure you got the right bang for the buck. And always the other key piece is reach out to Fred. If you got a project you want to touch on, he's a really good contact. You're looking for a project, even better. He works right across Canada. And in some provinces, if he's not permitted, he'll find a resource. So basically, in essence, he can work across Canada.
Everything you heard today is for educational purposes only. It's not professional advice. Before you act on anything, talk to a certified expert in your area. Your accountant, your lawyer, someone who knows your situation. We share perspectives. You make the decisions. Want more? Head over to blog.knack4business.com, packed with practical episodes on AI, marketing, leadership, and growth. No fluff, just the good stuff. Subscribe while you're there. Until next time, keep building.